Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Star Wars channel. I'm so grateful you found your way here tonight. Maybe it's been a long day in your own galaxy, or maybe you're simply ready to drift somewhere quieter, somewhere where starlight glows softly and the Force moves like a gentle tide through the universe. There's nothing you need to do now but rest. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts float like ships slipping into hyperspace, and allow your heart to settle into the stillness between distant suns. Because tonight, we're not just falling asleep. We're journeying through a galaxy far, far away. From the shadows of Order 66 to the fall of Palpatine. From the march of stormtroopers to the quiet hope of rebellion. This is your peaceful voyage through the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire. So close your eyes, sink a little deeper into comfort, and may the Force be with you, always. 1. A galaxy holds its breath. On the final twilight of the Republic, the galaxy seemed to exhale a long, trembling sigh. Stars that had witnessed centuries of peace now flickered with quiet uncertainty, as if sensing that history was beginning to shift beneath them. In the Senate's vast chambers, voices once filled with debate had softened, weighed down by exhaustion from years of endless war. Worlds across the rim grew still, wondering what form their future would take and whether the promise of stability would ever return. Yet in this hush, something darker stirred. The hum of hyperspace lanes seemed tense, as if the very cosmos anticipated the storm to come. And in that suspended moment, the first shadow of the Empire began to gather. 2. Order 66 whispers. Across the stars. When Order 66 was transmitted, it did not roar across the galaxy. It whispered. A simple coded phrase carried quietly through the subspace channels, slipping into the helmets and minds of clone troopers who had once been brothers in arms to the Jedi. The command was clinical, emotionless, almost gentle in its deadly precision, and yet its consequences rippled like a silent tremor through the Force, turning trust to tragedy in an instant. Across countless battlefields, Jedi paused, sensing something cold brushing against their minds. Some had only a heartbeat to understand. Some never knew at all. The clones executed the command with perfect discipline, their loyalty reshaped in a single breath. And in the echoes of that whisper, the galaxy's fate shifted forever. 3. The night the Jedi fell silent. As Order 66 unfolded, night seemed to fall across the Jedi Order all at once, no matter the hour on any given world. The great temple on Coruscant, once a beacon of serenity, dimmed with a heavy and unnatural quiet. Training halls that had echoed with the laughter of younglings grew still. Meditation chambers, filled with the soft hum of the Force, now resonated only with absence. Across the stars, lightsabers that had protected peace for 1,000 generations were extinguished, some in battle, some in surrender, some in a final moment of reflection. The Force trembled, as though mourning its lost guardians, sending ripples of sorrow into hyperspace. And from that vast and solemn silence, a new, darker era began to rise. 4. Rise of the First Galactic Empire. When Chancellor Palpatine stood before the Senate to declare the birth of the First Galactic Empire, his voice carried a quiet, reassuring steadiness. It drifted through the chamber like a soft tide, promising order after chaos, safety after fear. Senators who had once fought fiercely for freedom found themselves applauding, weary from years of war and desperate for the comfort of certainty. The vast rotunda shimmered with the light of 1,000 floating platforms, each one a witness to the moment democracy dissolved into a single echo. Outside, Coruscant's traffic lanes glowed like threads of molten gold. Citizens gazed upward, unaware of the deeper shadow taking shape above them. And in that applause, a new destiny quietly settled over the stars. 5. The death of the Clone Wars. With the Empire's rise came the gentle, deceptively peaceful ending of the Clone Wars. Battlefields that had raged for years suddenly fell silent, as though the galaxy itself had exhaled in relief. The conflict that once tore systems apart now faded into a distant hum, its final skirmishes swallowed by the swift reorganization of power. Holonews channels spoke of victory, unity, and the promise of a safer tomorrow. But beneath those soft proclamations lay a deeper truth. The war had never ended naturally. It had been designed to collapse at this exact moment, like a stage set dismantling once the final act had been played. The clones returned to barracks. Starships landed in neat, orderly patterns. And in the stillness, the true purpose of the war was finally revealed. 6. The Chancellor transformed. Once, Palpatine had been seen as a patient, humble leader, a man who rose reluctantly to meet the demands of a troubled era. But after the war, a subtle transformation unfolded. His robes darkened, his presence deepened. His voice grew slower, smoother, carrying an undercurrent of something ancient and unfathomable. Few questioned the shift. Most accepted it as a natural evolution of leadership. Yet to those attuned to the Force, a chilling realization lingered. The man they thought they knew had been wearing a mask all along. The Emperor was not born in the moment he declared the Empire. He had been waiting, hidden in plain sight. And with that mask finally lowered, the galaxy entered a new and shadowed age. 7. Storm of applause in the Senate. When the Senate erupted in applause at Palpatine's declaration, the sound was strangely gentle, not triumphant, but weary. It washed through the chamber like distant rain, born from exhaustion rather than joy. Representatives who had once defended liberty now clung to the promise of stability, letting the soft thunder of their approval mask their fear of what they had surrendered. The floating platforms glowed faintly, drifting like islands adrift on an uncertain sea, each applauding because the others did. Outside those walls, the galaxy shifted quietly. A new order settled into place, not by force of arms, but by the simple easing of tired minds. And beneath that polite applause, freedom slipped silently into shadow. 8. A new uniform for the galaxy. As the Empire took shape, its soldiers stepped into stark new uniforms, a palette of black, white, and steel that reflected the cold clarity of Imperial authority. Stormtrooper armor gleamed beneath artificial lights, its smooth lines designed to erase individuality and replace it with unwavering discipline. Officers traded colorful Republic insignias for crisp, austere ranks that spoke not of creativity, but of rigid hierarchy. Even planetary banners were replaced with the red and black sigil of the Empire, fluttering like silent warnings across cityscapes. Citizens noticed the change gradually, like a chill creeping through familiar streets. The Empire did not need to raise its voice. Its uniforms spoke for it, whispering of control, order, and obedience. And so, the galaxy learned to recognize power by the gleam of armor in the dark. 9. The birth of fear as order. In the early days of Imperial rule, fear did not descend abruptly. It grew slowly, like a frost spreading across a window pane. People first felt it in small moments. A neighbor speaking more softly, a journalist's broadcast ending abruptly, a patrol lingering a little too long on a quiet street. The Empire understood that fear, delivered gently, could be more controlling than any spoken threat. It became a quiet companion to daily life, settling into conversations and drifting through homes like an unseen mist. Yet the stillness it created was often mistaken for peace. Citizens told themselves they were safer now, even as freedoms dimmed one by one, like stars fading before a coming storm. And in that uneasy calm, the Emperor's hold grew ever tighter. 10. The Empire's promise of stability. In the days immediately following its formation, the Empire presented itself as a guardian of stability. Holonet announcements spoke softly of unity, of rebuilding, of a calmer tomorrow, waiting just beyond the horizon. Citizens, weary from years of conflict, clung to these assurances like travelers holding lanterns on a darkened road. Even the rhythmic hum of patrol ships overhead seemed to suggest a new era of order. Predictable, structured, serene. But beneath this facade was a deeper current, a steady tightening that most could not yet perceive. The price of stability, though never spoken aloud, would be paid in freedoms quietly surrendered. And in the comforting promise of peace, the first seeds of control took root. 11. The last days of the clones. After the war, the clones, once the proud, loyal backbone of the Republic, began to fade quietly from public life. Their armor remained polished, their posture precise, yet something in their presence felt changed, as though an invisible weight rested upon their shoulders. Many were reassigned to distant outposts or quiet garrisons, their numbers dwindling as the Empire shifted toward a new kind of soldier. No grand announcements marked the end of their service. Instead, the clones simply stepped into the background of a galaxy that no longer recognized the sacrifices they had made. Their brotherhood endured in whispers, in shared glances, in memories of battles fought side by side. And as their footsteps grew faint, a new generation prepared to take their place. 12. Stormtroopers march under new suns. The stormtroopers who succeeded the clones marched with a different energy, not born from shared origins, but shaped through strict training and unwavering doctrine. Their crisp white armor gleamed beneath foreign suns as they spread across the galaxy, symbols of the Empire's expanding reach. Each trooper carried the weight of expectation, to enforce order, to obey without hesitation, to become the faceless embodiment of Imperial will. On some worlds, their arrival brought uneasy quiet. On others, outright fear. Yet their synchronized movements and emotionless helmets created an illusion of unity, a perfect machine built to maintain the Emperor's vision. And beneath those helmets, countless individuals became one unbroken silhouette against the stars. 13. The armor evolves. Stormtrooper armor represented more than protection. It was a design crafted to reshape identity. Its white sheen reflected starlight like polished bone, a deliberate choice meant to give troopers an almost spectral presence wherever they marched. The armor was rigid, unyielding, often uncomfortable, but its purpose was psychological as much as practical. It hid faces. It muted voices. It transformed individual beings into identical silhouettes moving as one. On countless worlds, the mere sight of a stormtrooper's visor glinting under street lamps brought conversations to an abrupt halt. The Empire understood that fear didn't always require violence. Sometimes it only required a shape in the dark. And so the armor stood, cold and pristine, beneath every shifting sky. 14. The TK designation gone were the clone troopers' names. the affectionate nicknames, the personal markings, the identities they had carved out for themselves during the war. In their place came designations, TK numbers spoken with clinical precision. Stormtroopers learned to answer to these codes as though they were their true selves, their pasts quietly erased and replaced with the Empire's new order. To some recruits, the numbers offered a strange sense of belonging, a way to shed old fears or painful histories. To others, the designation felt like a chain, binding them to a life stripped of individuality. But in the Empire's eyes, a soldier defined by a number was easier to command, easier to replace, easier to forget. And so the galaxy whispered with the soft echo of coded identities drifting through Imperial halls. 15. The Empire's recruitment worlds. Across thousands of star systems, the Empire established academies designed to mold the next generation of soldiers. On worlds rich and poor, recruiters arrived with glossy hollows, promising honor, purpose, and a chance to serve something greater than oneself. Young citizens, some eager, some uncertain, found themselves stepping onto transport ships, leaving their home skies behind. Life in these academies was strict and unrelenting, shaped by drills, doctrine, and a carefully curated version of galactic history. Slowly, recruits learned to march in unison, to speak with confidence, to silence doubts before they formed. The Empire knew that shaping a soldier began long before the armor was worn, and beneath alien constellations, thousands of new cadets began their long march into Imperial service. 16. Whispers of rebellion among recruits. Even within the rigid walls of Imperial academies, quiet doubts sometimes bloomed. Late at night, when the barracks lights dimmed and only the hum of ventilation filled the air, a few recruits whispered about the tightening grip of the Empire. They wondered why certain histories were forbidden, why questioning orders brought swift reprimands, why whole communities seemed to vanish after stormtrooper deployments. These murmurs were soft, cautious, rarely more than a breath shared between bunkmates under starlit windows. Most cadets silenced their own concerns, fearful of losing everything they had worked for. Yet the smallest seeds of rebellion often begin in such fragile moments. A half-spoken thought, a glance exchanged, a truth glimpsed, but not yet named. And in that stillness, the first quiet fractures began to form. 17. Elite units in the shadows beyond the gleaming white of standard stormtrooper armor existed a darker, more secretive cadre, the Empire's elite forces. Among them, the Death Troopers moved with eerie precision, their black armor absorbing light as though swallowing any warmth around them. Their voices were distorted into chilling, mechanical murmurs, incomprehensible to those outside their ranks. They served high-ranking officers, guarding secrets few others ever knew. Where these soldiers walked, tension followed. Civilians stepped aside instinctively, sensing danger in the subtle tilt of a helmet or the silent grip on a blaster rifle. Even other stormtroopers felt unease in their presence, as if these shadowed warriors were shaped by a different, darker hand. And through every mission, they carried the Empire's most concealed intentions into the night. 18. The 501st's dark reputation. The 501st Legion, once heroic under the banner of the Republic, became something far more fearsome in the era of the Empire. Known across worlds as Vader's Fist, they operated with unwavering efficiency, following their commander with a loyalty forged in fire. Their blue-marked armor remained a symbol of precision and discipline, but its meaning changed as they enforced Imperial law with ruthless finality. On planets resisting Imperial rule, tales of the 501st spread like cold wind. Stories of doors kicked in at dawn, of Jedi hunted without mercy, of entire settlements subdued in a single night. Yet within the Legion, many soldiers only saw duty, unable or unwilling to recognize how deeply the galaxy feared their arrival. And with every march, the legend of Vader's fist grew darker still. 19. Pilots of the Void. TIE fighter pilots lived their lives on the thin edge between silence and oblivion. Their ships, lightweight, fast, and fragile, offered little protection, leaving each pilot suspended in the cold vacuum of space with only a thin cockpit window between them and the stars. Many spoke of the engine's shrill howl, a scream that echoed through their bones long after landing, becoming the anthem of their service. Despite the harsh conditions, they flew with fierce devotion, believing speed and sacrifice were the highest honors an Imperial pilot could achieve. As they streaked across black skies and tight formations, their silhouettes resembled dark sparks scattered across the void. And in every flight, they carried the Empire's reach into the farthest corners of the galaxy. 20. Marching in unison. On countless worlds, the synchronized march of stormtroopers became a sound as familiar as rainfall. Steady, controlled, unbroken. Their boots struck the ground with practiced precision, creating a rhythm that echoed through plazas, spaceports, and narrow streets. For some citizens, the uniformity brought reassurance, a promise that order had arrived. For others, it stirred unease, a reminder that individuality had been replaced by something colder and more absolute. Troopers rarely spoke while marching. Their silence was part of the spectacle, the message, the power. It told onlookers that discipline had triumphed, that there was no room for dissent beneath the Empire's watchful eye. And with every unified step, the galaxy felt the weight of Imperial control pressing just a little deeper into its soil. 21. The New Order's Iron Sectors. When the Empire dissolved the political freedoms of the Republic, it reshaped the galaxy into rigid sectors overseen by powerful governors. These new rulers held sweeping authority, able to command fleets, raise taxes, and enforce imperial doctrine with near total autonomy. Some operated from towering citadels. Others ruled from orbiting stations that drifted like silent sentinels above their assigned worlds. For the citizens living within these iron-bound territories, life grew structured and predictable, but also watched, monitored, and controlled. The Senate's voice faded into irrelevance as regional commanders tightened their grip, answering only to the Emperor. And beneath this new structure, the galaxy's once vibrant political tapestry slowly unraveled into a single, darkened thread. 22. Moffs and Grand Moffs rise. As the Empire expanded, new titles emerged: Moff, and above them, Grand Moff. Positions crafted to oversee entire regions with unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. These leaders governed vast stretches of space, their power eclipsing anything held by senators in the dying days of the Republic. Among them, Grand Moff Tarkin stood as the most formidable figure, a man whose icy calm mirrored the very philosophy of the Empire. From orbiting command centers and towering fortresses, these officials shaped policy with unyielding precision, enforcing order through fear, efficiency, and absolute authority. Their decisions sculpted the fates of trillions across the stars. And under their careful watch, the Empire's hold grew tighter with every passing rotation. 23. Planetary subjugation protocols. The Empire did not always conquer worlds with grand battles or sweeping invasions. Instead, it often relied on subtle, calculated steps known as subjugation protocols, a small garrison installed, supply lines redirected, communication channels monitored, then restricted, local leaders quietly replaced by imperial-appointed governors. At first, these changes seemed mild, small ripples rather than waves, but their combined effect gradually reshaped a world's entire way of life. Citizens found themselves adapting without realizing how much they had lost. Traditions dimmed, freedoms shrank, voices softened. On some planets, resistance flickered briefly before being smothered by overwhelming force. On others, submission settled like a quiet fog. And through these methods, entire civilizations were reshaped without the Empire ever needing to fire a single shot. 24. The disappearing holonet. The holonet, once a vibrant web of news, culture, and conversation connecting distant star systems, slowly dimmed under Imperial rule. Certain channels vanished overnight, replaced by polished broadcasts praising order and stability. Independent reporters found their voices fading into static, their stories replaced by carefully curated narratives approved by the Empire. Citizens noticed the change in subtle ways: fewer perspectives, fewer debates, fewer truths. Information flowed downward from a single source, like water diverted through narrow pipes. The galaxy felt quieter, not because there was less to say, but because there were fewer allowed to say it. And in that curated silence, the Empire shaped reality itself, one filtered transmission at a time. 25. Imperial propaganda streams. Across the galaxy, the Empire's voice drifted through homes in the form of polished holonet broadcasts. These streams were slow, soothing, almost comforting in their tone. Anchors spoke with carefully measured calm, describing Imperial victories and regional improvements with the gentlest of smiles. The reassuring cadence masked the quiet removal of dissent, replacing debate with harmony and harmony with obedience. Many citizens found the soft rhythms of these broadcasts oddly relaxing, like a familiar lullaby drifting through evening air. But behind the serene delivery lay a carefully crafted illusion, shaping thought one quiet message at a time. And through these tranquil transmissions, the Empire wrapped itself around daily life, like a velvet glove, concealing an iron hand. 26. Corporate alliances strengthened. In the era of the Empire, massive corporations flourished beneath Imperial rule. The Mining Guild, Kuat Drive Yards, and countless others formed lucrative partnerships with the new regime, trading resources and technology for privileged status. Meetings between CEOs and Imperial officials took place behind sealed doors, where agreements were spoken softly, polished with promises of mutual gain. Factories expanded, shipyards glowed like floating constellations. Entire worlds were reshaped to feed the Empire's relentless appetite for machinery and metal. Workers labored beneath towering smokestacks, unaware that their small contributions would one day fuel fleets capable of crushing rebellion. And with each quiet deal signed beneath dim lights, the Empire's industrial heart grew stronger and more unyielding. 27. Mining worlds drained. Dry. On remote planets, rich in minerals, the Empire established vast extraction operations. Mountains were carved into jagged silhouettes. Once green valleys became sprawling excavation scars, glowing with the orange flicker of industrial lights. The rhythmic thrum of machinery filled the air, echoing across landscapes that had once been serene. Local communities watched their natural treasures vanish, piece by piece, in transport ships bound for Imperial foundries. Many workers toiled long hours, soot settling into their clothes. their faces illuminated by the pale shimmer of mining lasers. These worlds grew quieter over time, not with peace, but with exhaustion, drained of both resources and spirit. And as the last shipments departed, the Empire left behind hollow planets, echoing with silence. 28. The Empire's taxation. Web under Imperial rule, taxation became an invisible net cast across the galaxy. Worlds once free to govern their own economies now found themselves contributing to a vast central treasury, funneling wealth toward the core. The process was quiet and methodical. Small increases here, new fees there, so subtle that many citizens barely noticed at first. Yet with each passing cycle, more resources were drawn inward, feeding the Empire's colossal war machine. Farmers on distant plains felt the pressure in dwindling profits. Merchants in busy spaceports noticed new levies tucked into transport fees. Even prosperous core worlds bowed under the expanding economic weight. And through this intricate financial web, Palpatine strengthened his grip without ever raising his voice. 29. Alien rights. Eroding. Though never declared openly, the Empire's stance toward non-human species shifted into quiet discrimination. Alien senators found their influence reduced. Alien officers were rarely promoted. Alien communities noticed harsher patrols, stricter curfews, and a growing distance between themselves and the liberties they once held. In some cities, whispers of human-first policies drifted through crowded markets. Many beings who had served the Republic with pride now felt unwelcome in the very systems they helped protect. Species with rich histories and traditions found their cultural spaces tightened, their leaders watched, their opportunities fading into shadows. This erosion did not come with fanfare or decree, only with silence, like a slow-moving tide that washed away rights grain by grain. And in that quiet marginalization, resentment began to simmer beneath the surface of countless worlds. 30. The heavy price of peace. To the ordinary citizen, the Empire appeared peaceful. Crime dropped, travel routes stabilized, wars ended. But this tranquility carried an invisible cost. One paid in freedom surrendered and voices stilled. Peace, the Empire taught, required obedience. Order demanded compliance. Families learned not to question stormtrooper patrols. Teachers carefully edited lessons to avoid forbidden subjects. Musicians, artists, and storytellers softened their work, fearful of drawing unwanted attention. In exchange, life seemed calm, predictable in a way that made it easy to sleep at night, if one ignored the unease beneath it. This was the paradox of imperial peace, soothing on the surface, suffocating beneath. And in that constricting calm, the first sparks of rebellion quietly began to glow. 31. A dark figure walks the halls. Within the polished corridors of Imperial Star Destroyers, a single presence could quiet an entire deck. Darth Vader's heavy footsteps echoed like distant thunder, each step softened by the pressurized air, but carrying a weight that chilled those nearby. Officers straightened their uniforms. Stormtroopers grew still. Even the steady hum of machinery felt subdued, as though the ship itself recognized the gravity of his passing. His black silhouette seemed to absorb the light around him, turning long hallways into narrow tunnels of shadow. Few dared speak in his presence, and fewer still dared look directly at him. Wherever he walked, silence followed like a loyal companion. And in that silence, the true power of the Empire revealed itself beneath the hum of mechanical breath. 32. The armor that sustains him. Vader's armor was more than a suit. It was a life support prison forged from pain and necessity. Encased within its rigid plates, he moved with deliberate heaviness, each motion accompanied by the soft whir of servo motors. The armor shielded him from the galaxy, but also kept him bound to memories he could never fully escape. Within the helmet, the world came filtered and cold, every sound distant, every breath a reminder of the fire that had reshaped him. Some believed the armor made him invincible, yet within its metal shell lived a man whose every heartbeat was measured by the machinery that kept him alive. And with each breath, he walked the thin line between the darkness that consumed him and the fragments of humanity that still flickered deep within. 33. The voice of mechanical breath. Perhaps the most haunting symbol of Vader's presence was not his mask or his armor, but the rhythmic cadence of his breath. A deep inhale, a steady exhale. Smooth, mechanical, unavoidable. It echoed through briefing rooms, command decks, and dimly lit hallways like a slow heartbeat in an empty chamber. For many, that sound became a warning long before Vader even appeared. Officers froze at its first faint hiss. Troopers tightened their stances. Even seasoned commanders felt a shiver trace their spine. Yet beneath its intimidating weight, the breath held a strange sadness, a reminder of a life shaped by tragedy and transformed by the Emperor's will. And every inhale carried the past, while every exhale whispered of what he had become. 34. Vader's ship, the Executor. The Executor, Vader's personal flagship, drifted through space like a vast shadow cast across the stars. Its dagger-shaped form stretched for miles, so large that smaller vessels seemed to vanish against its obsidian hull. Within its chambers, lights glowed softly, creating long reflections that shimmered like moonlight across polished floors. Every corridor carried a faint, ever-present vibration, the slow heartbeat of a ship built for dominance. To the crews who served aboard it, the Executor was both fortress and phantom, a place where whispers rarely rose above a breath. Even the stars outside seemed quieter when viewed from its observation decks. And at its center, Darth Vader stood as the silent spine of the vessel, guiding its path through the darkened sea of the galaxy. 35. The Jedi Hunter. After the rise of the Empire, Vader became more than a commander. He became a hunter. Across forgotten worlds and ancient temples, he followed faint traces of Force signatures like pathways carved through time. Survivors of Order 66 felt his approach long before he arrived, sensing a chill in the Force that crept slowly across the horizon. When he confronted them, the battles were swift, fierce, and often filled with sorrow. Many Jedi recognized the man behind the mask, if only for a breath, glimpsing the remnants of a soul they once knew. But his purpose was unyielding, shaped by grief, fury, and the Emperor's command. And with each extinguished lightsaber, the galaxy grew a little darker, the memory of the Jedi fading like mist before dawn. 36. Vader's private quarters. Deep inside his Star Destroyer lay Vader's private chamber, a quiet, dimly lit sanctuary hidden from the bustling activity of the fleet. The air inside was cool and heavy, filled with a soft hum of machines that soothed his damaged body. Unlike the imposing corridors outside, these rooms were almost monastic in their simplicity. Smooth walls, minimal furnishings, and a single spherical meditation pod that opened like a blooming black flower. Here, Vader removed his helmet, allowing the machinery to breathe for him as he drifted into uneasy reflection. Within these metallic walls, he was not a commander nor a hunter, but a solitary figure suspended between past and present. And in that fragile stillness, Echoes of another life stirred like distant starlight. 37. His meditation chamber. Vader's meditation chamber was one of the few places in the galaxy where he could exist without the oppressive weight of his armor. When the chamber sealed shut, its segmented plates folding together with a soft hydraulic sigh, the world outside fell away. The lights dimmed to a gentle glow, and the ever-present thrum of the ship softened into something like a heartbeat. Inside this quiet cocoon, Vader let his mind drift into the currents of the Force, turbulent, sorrowful, and endlessly deep. Here he could breathe without the mask, though each breath came with pain. In this vulnerable space, past and present mingled in uneasy harmony. And in the chamber's still darkness, his fractured spirit sought moments of peace that never fully came. 38. Whispers of his past. Across the Empire, officers and troopers spoke quietly about Vader's origins, though none dared do so when he was near. Some believed he was a creature born of the war, forged from fire and machinery. Others whispered he had once been a Jedi, a rumor that flowed through mess halls and dim barracks like a forbidden lullaby. There were even those who swore they'd seen him pause at the mention of the Clone Wars, as though something deep within him stirred at old memories. Yet the truth remained hidden behind layers of secrecy and fear. Only the Emperor knew the full story, and he guarded it fiercely. And so, Vader's past lingered like a half-remembered dream, unclear, unspoken, but always felt in the shadows around him. 39. His secret visits to Mustafar. On rare occasions, Vader returned to the volcanic world of Mustafar, a place etched into the deepest scar of his past. There, beneath skies filled with burning ash and rivers of glowing magma, he walked the blackened ground in somber silence. The fortress he built stood like a jagged monument to loss, rising from the molten landscape with a lonely, brooding presence. The air trembled with heat, yet Vader felt a strange coldness whenever he visited. The memories the planet stirred were painful, but they anchored him to the anger that fueled his power. He meditated by the lava flows, letting the roar of the planet drown the fragments of a life he could never reclaim. And in that fiery solitude, the darkness within him deepened, slow and steady as cooling stone. 40. The Emperor's Leash. Though Vader commanded fear across the galaxy, his power was never fully his own. Palpatine kept him bound by invisible chains, woven from manipulation, guilt, and the dark side's suffocating pull. Whenever Vader stood before his master, the air seemed to thicken, as if even the Force hesitated between them. Palpatine's voice, calm and deliberate, reminded Vader of the price of defiance, the fragility of his rebuilt body, and the memories he could never outrun. To others, the pair appeared united, but beneath that illusion lay a constant tension, a master holding a wounded apprentice on a very short tether. And with every command spoken in that soft, chilling tone, Vader stepped deeper into obedience, unable to fully break free. 41. The Emperor's hidden throne room. Deep within the Imperial Palace on Coruscant lay a chamber known only to a select few, Palpatine's hidden throne room. It was a space of dim lights and towering shadows, lined with ancient artifacts that whispered of forgotten Sith lore. Here, the Emperor sat for long hours, motionless as stone, gazing into swirling holograms and distant stars. Unlike the public throne room above, this secret sanctuary was not a place for politics. It was a place for meditation, for feeding on the dark side, for shaping the future with quiet, deliberate malice. Visitors rarely entered, and those who did found themselves surrounded by an oppressive stillness as though time itself bowed to the Emperor's will. And in that secret darkness, Palpatine planned the galaxy's fate with cold, patient clarity. 42. His mask of calm authority. Though Palpatine ruled through fear, he rarely raised his voice. Instead, he spoke with measured calm, his words drifting like a steady breeze through council chambers and senate halls. His tone soothed, even as it commanded, carrying the illusion of a benevolent guardian watching over a vulnerable galaxy. Many citizens believed in this gentle facade, convinced the Emperor sought only unity and protection. Even imperial officers, hardened by years of service, found themselves influenced by his soft-spoken authority. It was in these subtle tones that he manipulated hearts, redirected loyalties, and shaped decisions that would ripple across the stars. And beneath every quiet word, the dark side curled like smoke, guiding the Empire toward his carefully crafted vision. 43. How Palpatine manipulated the Senate. Long before he crowned himself Emperor, Palpatine mastered the quiet art of influence. He spoke seldom, yet always at the right moment, shaping debates with subtle nods and carefully placed phrases. Senators believed he shared their concerns, that he listened, that he cared. But his calm demeanor concealed a web of strategies woven over decades. He allowed others to quarrel, to exhaust themselves in endless discussions, while he positioned himself as the sensible voice of compromise. With each crisis, he gained more emergency powers, never demanding them, merely accepting them as though reluctantly fulfilling a burden. And by the time the Senate realized how deeply he had guided its every decision, their authority had already faded into the soft twilight of the past. 44. His exploration of the dark side. Hidden behind the facade of a gentle leader, Palpatine descended into depths of the dark side that few beings had ever touched. In secret chambers, he studied ancient Sith scrolls written in languages older than the Republic itself. Strange artifacts pulsed softly under his touch, resonating with forgotten power. He meditated for hours, letting his mind drift into shadowy currents where rage, ambition, and fear wove together like storm clouds. To him, the dark side was not chaos, but clarity, a mirror reflecting the galaxy's true nature. He saw paths that others could not, futures shaped by unseen hands, destinies bent with a whisper. And each time he emerged from those meditations, his smile grew colder, as though some hidden truth had tightened its grip upon him. 45. The Empire's occult branches. Beyond the visible structure of the Imperial military lay secretive divisions shrouded in myth. These were the branches dedicated to the arcane, to relic hunting, force experimentation, and the quiet elimination of anything that might disrupt the Emperor's designs. Among these shadows roamed the Inquisitors, the Dark Adepts, and scholars who sifted through ancient ruins seeking echoes of the Jedi and the Sith. Some explored forgotten temples, their steps echoing through dust-covered halls where time seemed to sleep. Others interrogated captured Force sensitives, hoping to uncover secrets buried within their memories. These operations were rarely acknowledged, yet their influence rippled across the galaxy like a hidden undertow. And through their silent work, Palpatine tightened his hold on the mystical forces that shaped the very fabric of destiny. 46. Prophecies twisted to his will. Palpatine possessed a rare talent for bending prophecy itself, reshaping ancient predictions into tools for his own ambition. Sith legends spoke of chosen ones, of cosmic shifts, of balances tipped by destiny. He studied these texts not as immutable truths, but as malleable threads, ready to be woven into a narrative that served him. He interpreted omens with quiet confidence, presenting his versions as absolute foresight. In secret, he manipulated events so subtly that even the Force seemed to murmur in confusion. The future became a tapestry he rewrote endlessly, claiming inevitability where there was only design. And with each prophecy twisted, the galaxy stepped further into a path he had prepared long before anyone realized they were walking it. 47. His obsession with immortality. Behind the Emperor's calm exterior burned an unrelenting hunger, the desire to outlive death itself. In hidden laboratories and unknowable vaults, he pursued the darkest arts of preservation and rebirth. Scientists labored beneath flickering lights, studying cloning, essence transfer, and forbidden rituals whispered only in ancient Sith tombs. Palpatine meditated upon the possibility of eternal life with a stillness that chilled even his closest servants. He believed the dark side could bind the body to the spirit indefinitely, defying the natural cycle of existence. Yet every attempt left him unsatisfied, reaching deeper into shadows that even the Sith feared to explore. And though he walked the galaxy with the appearance of frail humanity, his gaze carried the weight of a being yearning to claim eternity. 48. The Shadow Council. Unseen by most of the Empire, a quiet assembly of advisors served the Emperor from behind layers of secrecy. This Shadow Council consisted of governors, intelligence officers, and loyal strategists who shaped policy in ways the public could never fathom. They met in dim chambers, far from the bustle of political life, their holographic forms flickering like ghosts as they discussed the galaxy's future. Each member carried their own ambitions, yet none dared oppose Palpatine. His presence hovered in every conversation, dictating the tone even when he remained unseen. Through this council, subtle decisions influenced entire sectors, guiding trade routes, population movements, and military deployments. And in their hushed deliberations, the Empire's direction was shaped like clay, molded by quiet, unseen hands. 49. The grand strategy of control. The Empire's grip on the galaxy did not rely on brute force alone. Palpatine's true genius lay in the subtle, multi-layered strategy he wove across star systems like a vast, invisible net. Every policy, every fleet movement, every appointed governor served a single purpose: to make resistance feel hopeless before it even began. Transportation routes were monitored, essential goods were regulated, education was rewritten to reinforce loyalty. Even planetary holidays were quietly replaced with imperial observances, slowly shifting culture itself. Citizens grew accustomed to the reassuring presence of uniformity, mistaking structure for safety. By the time many realized how little freedom remained, the Empire's roots had already settled deep beneath the surface. And with each passing cycle, the galaxy slipped further into the calm, suffocating embrace of Imperial order. 50. Palpatine's cold vision of order. To Palpatine, the galaxy was not a collection of vibrant cultures. It was a puzzle to be solved, a chaos to be tamed. His vision of peace was one in which every voice aligned, every movement obeyed, and every doubt evaporated beneath the shadow of authority. He believed sentient beings were too unpredictable to govern themselves, too emotional to maintain harmony without firm guidance. Thus, he sought to replace the living pulse of the Republic with something colder, a galaxy shaped by discipline, hierarchy, and silence. It was a vision devoid of compassion but rich in control, like a still lake whose calm surface concealed dangerous depths. and under his rule, tranquility became both a promise and a warning, a serenity maintained by fear rather than hope. 51. Star destroyers as symbols. Long before a star destroyer fired a shot, it had already accomplished half its mission simply by appearing in a world's orbit. These massive vessels, with their sharp triangular silhouettes, hung above cities like floating mountains of steel. Their hulls gleamed beneath distant suns, reflecting light in cold, steady patterns that evoked both awe and unease. Inside, corridors stretched endlessly, echoing with boots and machinery. Thousands of crew members lived within those walls, moving in synchronized precision, serving a machine that served the Empire. To many planets, a star destroyer's arrival meant compliance. To others, it meant surrender. Wherever they traveled, peace followed, not the gentle peace of understanding, but the heavy peace of unavoidable power. And in their looming shadows, the Empire's presence was unmistakable. 52. TIE Fighters, screams in the void. TIE Fighters were unlike any ships flown in the days of the Republic. Light, fast, and endlessly maneuverable, they carried no shields, no hyperdrives, and almost no comfort for the pilots inside. Yet their presence was unmistakable. Their twin ion engines produced a distinct wail, a piercing cry that echoed across the vacuum of space like the voice of some restless spirit. For rebel crews, that sound became a harbinger of danger. For Imperial citizens, it symbolized vigilance. For pilots, it was both a lullaby and a warning, a constant reminder of the narrow line between survival and oblivion. And as these angular craft darted through starlit skies, their haunting roar carried the Empire's reach far beyond the horizon of any world. 53. The Imperial Navy's relentless discipline. Life in the Imperial Navy moved with the precision of a ticking chronometer. Officers rose at the same hour each day, their routines dictated by schedules so strict that even hesitation felt like a breach of duty. The training was exhaustive, the expectations unyielding. Triumphs were acknowledged with quiet nods. Failures were met with icy reprimands. On the bridges of star destroyers, commands were spoken softly, yet carried the weight of fate. A single mistake could ripple across a fleet, altering the course of entire campaigns. Crew members moved with crisp efficiency, their footfalls echoing in perfectly timed rhythms across polished metal floors. In this culture of silent discipline, individuality faded, replaced by unwavering devotion to structure. And through this seamless unity, the Navy became the steel spine of the Empire's power. 54. The Death Star project begins. The dream of a moon-sized battle station began long before its silhouette darkened the stars. In secret, laboratories, architects and engineers whispered over flickering schematics, crafting blueprints that would one day reshape galactic history. The concept was simple yet terrifying. A superweapon capable of silencing entire worlds with a single burst of energy. Construction began in hidden shipyards, its earliest frameworks resembling a vast metallic skeleton drifting quietly through space. Workers toiled in rotating shifts, rarely knowing the full purpose of the structure they were building. The project grew slowly at first, then with accelerating momentum, fueled by the Emperor's unshakable vision. And as the first curved plates locked into place, a new age of fear quietly dawned across the stars. 55. The Kyber Crisis. To fuel the Death Star's terrible heart, the Empire sought one of the galaxy's most sacred resources, Kyber crystals. Once revered by the Jedi for their luminous connection to the Force, these crystals began to vanish from hidden caches temple ruins, and remote mining worlds. The extraction was swift and merciless. Entire regions felt the loss, as though a subtle light had dimmed across the stars. Transport ships carried the crystals under heavy guard, their cargo humming faintly with trapped energy. Whispered rumors spread that the crystals cried out through the Force, mourning their new purpose. And as the Empire harvested these ancient gems, the galaxy's spiritual balance trembled, foreshadowing a weapon unlike anything ever built. 56. The Scarif Construction Yards. Scarif, a world of shimmering blue waters and sunlit archipelagos, became the secret cradle of the Empire's most ambitious project. Beneath its peaceful horizon lay fortified towers, armored bunkers, and colossal data vaults. The construction yards spread across the surface like metallic reefs, their platforms rising above the waves with quiet determination. Engineers and labor teams worked in carefully controlled rotations, their lives regulated by the rhythmic pulse of alarms, schedules, and the soft hiss of sealed blast doors. Above them, supply ships drifted like silver birds, delivering components for the project that none fully understood. From orbit, Scarif looked serene, a paradise untouched. But below, its beauty hid a machine of secrecy where the Death Star's skeleton grew steadily in the sunlit silence. 57. The Doctrine of Overwhelming Force. The Empire's military philosophy rested on a simple but chilling idea: victory through undeniable dominance. Rather than match an enemy's strength, the Empire sought to drown it beneath sheer numbers, firepower, and presence. Entire fleets would arrive to crush a single uprising. Dozens of stormtroopers might be deployed to quell one frightened town. This doctrine created an illusion of inevitability, a sense that resistance was futile long before the first shot was fired. Citizens often surrendered at the sight of gleaming armor or the shadow of a star destroyer drifting overhead. The Empire's leaders believed fear was more efficient than diplomacy, more lasting than negotiation. And through overwhelming force, they shaped a galaxy where silence often replaced struggle. 58. The AT-AT March. Across frozen plains, desert dunes, and forested valleys, the thunderous steps of the AT-AT echoed like the slow heartbeat of a mechanical giant. These towering walkers moved with deliberate weight, each footfall sending tremors through the ground. Civilians often felt the vibrations long before they ever saw the machines, a distant rumble that grew steadily louder until the towering silhouettes emerged from dust or snow. Pilots within the armored heads sat in dimly lit control chambers, guiding the walkers with calm precision as viewports framed the world far below. Though cumbersome, the walkers carried an aura of unstoppable momentum, a cold reminder that the Empire preferred intimidation to subtlety. And wherever their shadows stretched, hope seemed to shrink beneath their steel-bound stride. 59. The AT-ST and Ground Commanders. Not all Imperial walkers towered above the landscape. The nimble AT-ST, with its bird-like stride and swiveling cockpit, served as the eyes and ears of many ground commanders. Perched high above the battlefield, pilots scanned the terrain from behind armored glass, their controls responding with quick, sharp motions. The AT-ST moved with a strange grace, half mechanical, half predatory, weaving between trees, rock formations, and trooper formations with calculated purpose. On quiet nights, stationed officers could hear the soft whir of its servos as it patrolled the perimeter, its glowing sensors cutting through the darkness like watchful eyes. And in that steady patrol, the Empire maintained vigilance, letting no movement escape the gaze of its restless machines. 60. The Empire's logistic web. Behind every Star Destroyer, every battalion, every outpost, lay an immense logistical network, humming quietly through hyperspace lanes. Cargo ships transported food, armor parts, fuel, uniforms, and thousands of tiny necessities that kept the Imperial war machine alive. Administrators in vast archive halls worked tirelessly, monitoring supply routes that stretched across entire sectors like threads in an enormous web. This system was rarely celebrated, yet without it, the Empire would collapse. Pilots relied on timely refueling. Troopers depended on daily rations. Entire garrisons awaited shipments that seldom arrived late. The web was precise, quiet, and relentless, a hidden backbone of the Empire's strength. And within its endless cycles, the galaxy pulsed with the rhythm of an empire determined never to falter. 61. The Grand Inquisitor's fallen path. Long before he donned the black and red of the Inquisitorius, the Grand Inquisitor once walked the marble halls of the Jedi Temple as a dedicated guard. He studied ancient texts with quiet devotion, haunted by unanswered questions and forbidden curiosities. After the fall of the Jedi, these unanswered questions turned into wounds the dark side easily exploited. Under Palpatine's whispering influence, he embraced a new purpose: to hunt the very order he once protected. His eyes, once calm, burned with a fire born of betrayal and twisted certainty. His double-bladed lightsaber became a spinning wheel of crimson judgment. And with each fallen Jedi, he drifted further from who he had been, becoming a wraith shaped by loss, anger, and unyielding obedience. 62. The Fortress Inquisitorius. Far across the waves of the volcanic moon, Nur stood the Fortress Inquisitorius, a solitary brooding structure rising from the dark sea like an obsidian tower. The water below churned with quiet menace, reflecting the fortress's harsh lines in rippling waves. Inside, the air hummed faintly, as though the very walls pulsed with the echoes of captured memories. Dim corridors stretched endlessly, lined with interrogation chambers and training arenas where inquisitors honed their deadly skills. Stormtroopers patrolled in silence, their reflections flickering across glossy floors. Deep within, vaults held relics from fallen Jedi, lightsabers, holocrons, fragments of a vanished order. The fortress felt timeless, suspended between sea and sky, a monument to fear. And in its depths, the Empire refined the art of breaking hope. 63. Jedi survivors in hiding. Across forgotten corners of the galaxy, scattered Jedi survivors lived quiet, hidden lives. Some retreated to remote forests, letting the whisper of leaves replace the hum of lightsabers. Others disappeared into crowded cityscapes, blending into the anonymous bustle of endless streets. A few wandered from world to world, following faint ripples in the Force like travelers seeking shelter from a storm. Though they rarely ignited their sabers, they carried their teachings in small gestures. A kind word, a moment of peace, a quiet act of healing. But danger followed them like a shadow, for the Empire's hunters never tired, and the dark side prickled whenever a Jedi reached out in hope. And so they lived in stillness, keeping the last embers of the light alive in secret places. 64. The Emperor's quiet hunt for Force sensitives. Even as the Jedi Order faded into myth, the Empire remained ever watchful for the faintest spark of Force sensitivity. Subtle tests appeared in schools and medical checks, disguised as routine screenings. Imperial officers recorded unusual reflexes, uncanny intuition, or strange bursts of luck. Children who showed promise disappeared quietly, Their families offered explanations wrapped in soothing words that concealed a far darker truth. Some of these children were taken to dark academies, shaped into tools of the Empire. Others were simply never seen again. The Force, once nurtured by the Jedi, was now harvested in secret, treated not as a gift, but as a resource. And through this silent search, Palpatine ensured that no new light would rise to challenge his shadow. 65. The Emperor's silent stability. To ordinary citizens, the Emperor became a symbol of unchanging stability. His face appeared on banners, statues, and holograms, always calm, always composed, as though aging itself dared not touch him. He seldom spoke to the public, but when he did, his voice flowed with a smooth, steady cadence that soothed listeners into quiet agreement. Many found comfort in this predictable presence, believing he alone protected them from chaos. His rare appearances created an air of mystique, amplified by the serene posture he maintained even in times of crisis. People whispered that he possessed a wisdom beyond mortal years, unaware of the dark power that kept him whole. And so, under his watchful stillness, the galaxy drifted into complacency, lulled by the illusion of eternal order. 66. His obsession with Sith relics across forgotten worlds, buried tombs, and ancient ruins. The Emperor sent secret expeditions in search of relics tied to the Sith of old. These artifacts pulsed with dormant power. Obsidian idols, fractured masks, ancient scrolls inscribed with symbols that glowed faintly in shadow. Each relic carried whispers of long-dead masters, and Palpatine listened intently, seeking wisdom lost to millennia. Some items were locked in vaults beneath Imperial strongholds, while others adorned the hidden chambers of the palace, their energies feeding his already formidable connection to the dark side. To him, these relics were not mere treasures. They were keys to unlocking deeper truths, deeper power, deeper control. And with every newfound artifact, the darkness within him grew more profound, settling around the Empire like a silent storm. 67. The Path Network. While the Empire tightened its grasp, a fragile thread of hope wound quietly through the outer reaches of the galaxy. A secret lifeline known only as the Path. Hidden safe houses, disguised farms, and unassuming families worked together to protect those fleeing the Empire's gaze. Jedi survivors, Force-sensitive children, and ordinary citizens escaping persecution found shelter along this delicate route. Messages were passed in coded symbols scratched into walls, in lanterns set in windows, in the gentle nods of strangers. Each stop along the path felt like a soft breath of safety in a world grown harsh and watchful. The Inquisitors hunted it relentlessly, but the path endured through kindness and quiet courage, and in its hidden footsteps, the light of compassion flickered stubbornly against the darkness. 68. Kyber crystals. Corrupted kyber crystals, once vibrant with clarity and light, pulsed in harmony with those who wielded them. But under the Empire's cruel grasp, many were forced into unnatural service. The dark side bent them, bleeding their radiant glow into crimson. This corruption did not merely change their color, it twisted their essence, filling them with an anguished hum that echoed through the Force like a distant cry. Inquisitors carried these red blades proudly, unaware or uncaring of the suffering trapped within their weapons. Each swing left a faint shiver in the air, as though the crystals mourned what they had become. To the Empire, these blades symbolized dominance, but to the Force, they were reminders of harmony torn apart and reshaped in shadow. 69. Vader, leading the final hunts. When rumors of surviving Jedi surfaced, Vader often took the hunt into his own hands. Across barren moons, forgotten temples, and mist-covered forests, his presence drifted like a cold wind that silenced wildlife and chilled the air. Jedi sensed him long before he arrived. A hollow ache in the Force, a tremor that whispered of inevitable confrontation. He moved with brutal precision, yet there were moments, fleeting and fragile, when hesitation flickered within him. Memories tugged. Old teachings stirred. But the Emperor's commands weighed heavily, turning doubt into rage. For many Jedi, the last thing they heard was the rhythmic breath of a once familiar soul, now lost to darkness. And with each fallen survivor, Vader sank deeper into the shadow he had chosen, unable to escape the echoes of what he'd destroyed. 70. The Jedi become legends. As years drifted by beneath the Empire's shadow, the Jedi slowly faded into whispered myth. Holonet archives were edited, stories softened, names erased. To younger generations, the Guardians of Peace became half-remembered figures, drifting between truth and bedtime tale. Some spoke of them with awe, imagining luminous beings who glided through the stars. Others dismissed them as fabrications of a gullible past. Only a few elders remembered the calm hum of a lightsaber or the serene wisdom of a robed visitor who once passed through their village. These memories flickered like dying embers, fragile, warm, and easily overlooked. And as the Empire reshaped history, the Jedi lived on only in the quiet spaces between stories, waiting like faint constellations for someone to look up and remember the light. 71. Whispers on distant worlds. Long before the rebellion openly rose, resistance began as little more than murmurs carried on desert winds and forest breezes. On backwater planets, farmers spoke cautiously in dimly lit taverns. Mechanics shared rumors over half-repaired engines. Families huddled around fire pits, wondering if others felt the same quiet unease growing beneath imperial rule. These whispers rarely carried names or plans, only feelings: frustration, longing, the faint spark of courage. On some worlds, a single act of defiance kindled hope, like a lantern being lit in a vast night. Stormtroopers dismissed such moments as trivial, unaware of the subtle unity forming across the stars. And from these scattered murmurs, the seeds of rebellion rooted themselves gently in the galactic soil, preparing to bloom when the time was right. 72. Saw Gerrera's extreme resistance. Among the earliest and fiercest opponents of the Empire was Saw Gerrera, a man who carried rebellion not as a banner, but as a burden etched deep into his heart. He and his partisans struck from shadowed caves, dense jungles, and crumbling ruins, moving like phantoms across war-torn landscapes. Their tactics were harsh, born from years of loss and the belief that survival required uncompromising action. To some, Saw was a hero, a flame in the darkness. To others, a warning of what desperation could create. His breath grew ragged with time, his body more machine than flesh, yet his resolve never dimmed. And though his methods diverged from the gentler currents of the growing rebellion, his unyielding fire helped ignite the wider fight for freedom. 73. The silent growth of rebel cells. While the Empire projected its dominance with overwhelming force, tiny sparks of defiance began to glow quietly across the stars. Small groups formed in back alleys, hidden basements, and forgotten corners of industrial outposts. They shared stolen supplies, coded messages, and stories of imperial cruelty that spread like candlelight passing from hand to hand. These early cells were fragile things, poorly armed, loosely connected, and always afraid of discovery. Yet they possessed something the Empire could never fully extinguish: belief. Belief that freedom still had a place in the galaxy. Belief that unity could rise from scattered shadows. And though each cell felt alone, they were threads in a vast tapestry slowly stitching itself together beneath the Empire's watchful gaze. 74. Mon Mothma's quiet courage. Senator. Mon Mothma fought the Empire not with blasters or starships, but with quiet defiance woven into her words. In Senate chambers heavy with tension, she spoke softly yet firmly, advocating for compassion and accountability, even as others bowed to fear. Her calm demeanor masked a growing resolve, a recognition that diplomacy alone could no longer mend the wounds spreading across the Republic's remnants. When she finally broke ties with the Empire, declaring her opposition openly, she became a beacon for the lost and the hopeful alike. Forced into hiding, she carried the weight of leadership with grace, her voice steady even in the darkest hours. And through her gentle strength, the scattered embers of resistance found a guiding light capable of igniting the dawn. 5. The spark that would become a rebellion. As the Empire tightened its grip, chance encounters and small alliances began to intertwine. A transport pilot smuggled a message. A senator shared a secret. A mechanic refused to stay silent. These little acts, fragile on their own, slowly formed the beginnings of a network, a quiet chorus rising beneath the roar of tyranny. No single moment created the rebellion. Rather, it grew like starlight, spreading across night. Softly, steadily, eventually becoming impossible to ignore. The Empire sensed the shift, but underestimated its strength, dismissing hope as weakness. Yet hope is patient, hope endures, and from these gentle beginnings, a movement was born, one that would someday challenge the darkness itself and lead the galaxy toward a brighter horizon. 76. The growing chorus of resistance. As whispers turned into quiet gatherings, the early rebel cells cautiously reached out to one another. Coded transmissions floated through hyperspace like faint melodies, each message a careful test of trust. Leaders met in secret, often beneath the cover of night, or within abandoned structures where old Republic flags still faded on the walls. Step by gentle step, these fragments began to weave themselves into something larger. Pilots offered their ships. Smugglers offered their routes. Former senators offered their voices. Every contribution, no matter how small, strengthened the fragile unity forming among the stars. And though the Empire still loomed like a storm cloud, the rebellion's first harmonies echoed quietly through the galaxy, promising that light could rise even in the deepest shadow. 77. Bail Organa's subtle movements. Senator Bail Organa worked against the Empire with the grace of a diplomat and the precision of a strategist. He moved through corridors of power with calm poise, hiding his resistance behind polite smiles and carefully measured words. His homeworld of Alderaan became a sanctuary of ideas, where scholars, allies, and refugees found shelter beneath the planet's peaceful skies. Bail funneled resources to fledgling cells, guided communication networks, and protected those too vulnerable to stand alone. Few realized how deeply his influence ran, or how much risk he carried with every discreet decision. In the Senate, he remained a voice of reason. In the shadows, he was one of the architects of hope. And though his efforts were quiet, they formed the steady heartbeat of the rebellion's earliest days. 78. Early acts of defiance. Before star fleets clashed and banners of rebellion were raised, there were small acts of defiance that warmed the galaxy's uncertain night. A transport captain who lied to an Imperial inspector, a clerk who misplaced a shipment of weapons, a farmer who hid a fugitive beneath his barn. These moments were tiny sparks, gestures of conscience offered by ordinary beings who refused to surrender their humanity. One by one, these actions accumulated, forming a constellation of bravery that even the Empire couldn't fully track. For every rebellion that sharpened blasters, another rebellion simply spoke truth, or shared food, or sheltered the endangered. And from these quiet choices, a movement grew, as gentle and persistent as dawn breaking across a silent horizon. 79. The birth of the rebel fleet. Before the rebellion assembled mighty cruisers and coordinated strike groups, its fleet began as a scatter of borrowed, stolen, and repurposed ships drifting between hidden rendezvous points. Some were aging, freighters with patched hulls. Others were sleek personal craft loaned by sympathetic senators. A few were former Republic vessels kept alive through skill and sheer determination. Pilots slept in their cockpits, waiting for coded signals. Mechanics whispered repairs by starlight, shielding sparks beneath tarps to avoid detection. Every functioning engine felt like a heartbeat, pulsing with hope. Piece by piece, these lonely ships formed the galaxy's first true fleet of freedom. Fragile, imperfect, yet guided by a purpose brighter than any star. And in their hum, the promise of resistance finally found its wings. 80. When the Senate began to break overtime, the Imperial Senate grew quieter, its chambers filled less with debate and more with resignation. Many senators realized their voices no longer influenced policy. The Emperor's will arrived already decided, wrapped in formal language that allowed no discussion. Holographic screens displayed smiling officials presenting new initiatives. But the old spirit of democracy flickered like a candle nearing its end. Some senators withdrew into silence, fearful of speaking. Others tried to resist, only to find themselves monitored, intimidated, or quietly removed. A few, like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, chose exile over silence, carrying their ideals with them into the shadows. And as the Senate dimmed, the illusion of representation remained, an echo of a republic long since swallowed by the Empire's growing tide. 81. The abolition of the Senate. Eventually, the Emperor dissolved the Senate altogether, sweeping away the last remnant of the Republic with a single decree. It happened quietly, almost anticlimactically, not with fireworks or violent upheaval, but with a simple announcement that regional governors would now maintain direct control. Worlds across the galaxy felt a strange stillness settle upon them. Some citizens barely noticed. Others felt as if a distant star had finally gone dark. The Senate chambers on Coruscant fell silent, their seats cold and empty. The grand architecture standing as a monument to a dream now turned to dust. In that moment, the Empire transformed fully into absolute rule, an unbroken chain of authority leading only to Palpatine. And the galaxy drifted deeper into night, unaware that dawn was slowly gathering its courage. 82. The Outer Rim. Titans. In the far reaches of the Outer Rim, life had always been rugged and unpredictable. But under the Empire, even these distant worlds felt the tightening grip of control. Patrol ships glided over quiet settlements, their searchlights cutting through dusk like cold, unblinking eyes. Checkpoints appeared along dusty trade routes, staffed by stormtroopers whose white armor gleamed beneath harsh suns. For many Outer Rim citizens, the Empire felt both distant and suffocating, a force that rarely offered help, yet always demanded obedience. Markets grew quieter, smugglers flew lower, travelers learned to speak softly and keep their papers close. And as imperial banners fluttered over towns that once celebrated freedom, a gentle restlessness stirred in the hearts of those who had always lived on the edge of the galaxy's authority. 83. Rebellion across different species. The uprising against the Empire was not born from any one world, species, or culture. It emerged like a constellation, many lights shining together across vast distances. Twi'lek freedom fighters resisted occupation on Ryloth, their leku marked with the scars of struggle. Wookiee warriors endured forced labor on Kashyyyk, their roars carrying promises of liberation. Mon Calamari shipbuilders crafted sleek vessels for the rebel fleet, their artistry turning into instruments of hope. Each species brought its own strengths, traditions, and stories, weaving a tapestry of unity that stood in stark contrast to the Empire's rigid hierarchy. Though scattered at first, they recognized in one another the same yearning for dignity, for choice, for light. And from these many voices rose a harmony powerful enough to challenge even the darkest throne. 84. The first rebel bases. Before Yavin, before Hoth, the early rebellion hid within forgotten corners of the galaxy. Old mining tunnels, abandoned listening posts, and dusty outposts, long overlooked by Imperial scouts. These bases were humble, furnished with mismatched equipment, salvaged parts, and star maps scrawled across makeshift tables. The smell of coolant mingled with the warmth of shared meals, and the soft beeping of consoles provided a gentle rhythm that eased weary hearts. Recruits slept in shifts, their dreams filled with equal parts fear and hope. Pilots polished helmets beside flickering lanterns. Strategists whispered plans that felt impossibly bold. Yet even in their vulnerability, these bases radiated a quiet determination, the fragile beginnings of an alliance that would soon shake the stars. And in their hidden halls, the promise of freedom took its first true breath. 85. The secret formation of the Rebel Alliance. The rebellion did not form with shouts or banners, but with quiet agreements whispered in dimly lit rooms. Leaders from distant worlds met in secrecy, their holograms flickering softly across empty warehouses, forest clearings, and hidden compartments aboard starships. They spoke in steady tones, weaving concerns into strategies and fears into shared resolve. The first official alliance was sealed not with triumph, but with relief, a recognition that none of them stood alone anymore. Representatives clasped hands, exchanged nods, and let out breaths they had been holding for years. And from that single, united promise, an organized movement emerged, fragile yet resolute, ready to rise against the seemingly unbreakable might of the Empire. 86. Rebel sabotage. Missions. Long before the galaxy heard the roar of open war, the rebellion began with subtle acts of sabotage. Small teams crept through shadows on Imperial outposts, placing charges with steady hands and racing hearts. Others altered supply records, created false directives, or redirected shipments of weapons to hidden bases. These missions were delicate dances between fear and courage, carried out under star-filled skies or within the humming depths of Imperial machinery. Even a single stolen component or delayed convoy could shift the balance in favor of the growing rebellion. The Empire rarely noticed at first, dismissing disruptions as accidents or clerical errors. But with each flicker of sabotage, the rebellion carved out its presence, quiet as a breath, steady as a heartbeat. patient as dawn. 87. Rogue One's critical moment. As the Empire neared completion of its terrible superweapon, a single mission emerged that would shape the fate of the galaxy. A small group of rebels, ordinary people with extraordinary resolve, stepped into the storm without expectation of return. Their goal was simple and impossible: to steal the schematics of the Death Star. On the tropical shores of Scarif, beneath blazing suns and drifting embers, they fought with the calm acceptance of those who knew the importance of their task. Their sacrifice resonated through the Force like a quiet bell, solemn, courageous, everlasting. And because of their final stand, a sliver of hope pierced the Empire's darkest design, guiding the galaxy toward a future where light might prevail once more. 88. The destruction of Alderaan. When the Death Star turned its cold gaze toward Alderaan, the galaxy changed in an instant. A peaceful world known for diplomacy, art, and gentle hearts was reduced to dust with a single pulse of emerald light. No alarm could have prepared the stars for such silence. The sudden vanishing of voices, histories, and dreams. Throughout the galaxy, people felt a tremor, as though the Force itself exhaled in sorrow. The Empire framed it as a demonstration of power, but the shock rippled through every hidden rebel cell and every quiet home that cherished freedom. Alderaan's loss became a wound that refused to fade, and from its ashes rose a renewed determination, carried with reverence by those who vowed to ensure such darkness would never consume another world. 89. The Death Star plans spread. Hope. After the sacrifice on Scarif, the Death Star plans traveled from hand to hand like a precious lantern carried through darkness. With each transfer, from data vaults to stolen tapes to a princess fleeing under fire, the hope they represented grew brighter. Rebel technicians studied the schematics in whispered awe, tracing potential weaknesses with trembling fingers. Pilots gathered around tactical displays, their faces illuminated by blue holographic light. Strategists weighed impossible odds against the single possibility that the Empire's might was not absolute. The plans were more than blueprints. They were a symbol of vulnerability in something believed invincible. And as they spread through the rebellion, the galaxy felt a glimmer of possibility, a soft, flickering promise that even the darkest machine could be undone. 90. The Battle of Yavin. When the rebel fleet emerged above the jungle moon of Yavin, their ships looked impossibly small against the looming shadow of the Death Star. Yet in those fragile fighters burned a courage forged from years of oppression. Pilots whispered last words to loved ones, steadied their breathing, and let the calm of purpose settle within their hearts. As starfighters streaked through narrow trenches, lasers flashing like falling stars, the battle became a dance of desperation and destiny. The Death Star's countdown echoed like a slow drum, inching toward annihilation. But one clear shot, guided by instinct and hope, pierced the darkness. And in the brilliant bloom of the station's destruction, the galaxy felt its first true sunrise in a generation. 91. The Emperor's growing paranoia. After the destruction of the Death Star, a subtle tension settled over the Imperial Palace. Palpatine's calm smile remained, but beneath it grew a deepening paranoia that spiraled quietly through his thoughts. He sensed change in the Force, a shift he could not fully control. His meditations grew longer, his visions darker, his patience thinner. Advisors noticed the flicker of suspicion in his eyes. Officers felt the weight of his displeasure in every tremor of silence. Even Vader sensed his master's unease, a tightening grip that made the air between them crackle like distant thunder. Palpatine redoubled his efforts to crush the rebellion, convinced destiny was slipping from his fingers. And in that growing fear, the seeds of his downfall began to take quiet root. 92. The Emperor's Throne on the Death Star II. The second Death Star, still under construction, housed a throne room unlike any other. A cold, cavernous chamber suspended high above the forest moon of Endor. Large windows framed the stars, their glow casting long shadows across polished floors. In the center, the Emperor's throne faced outward, allowing him to watch the galaxy he believed he commanded by mere will. Every whisper of machinery echoed softly through the room, creating a rhythm that lulled intruders into uneasy silence. Guards stood motionless along the perimeter, their gaze never wavering. From this chamber, Palpatine planned his final victory, convinced he could bend fate itself into obedience. But beneath those serene, watchful windows, the rebellion gathered, ready to challenge the calm tyranny that radiated from his seat of power. 93. The Emperor lures Luke to him. With the patience of a spider weaving its web, Palpatine extended a subtle invitation through the Force, drawing Luke Skywalker toward him. He sensed the boy's compassion, his doubts, his quiet fear, and sought to twist them as he had twisted so many before. Through visions and manipulation, he presented himself as an inevitable destination, a final test Luke could not avoid. When Luke arrived, the Emperor welcomed him with serene confidence, speaking softly, almost kindly, as though offering a gift rather than corruption. He hoped to ignite Luke's anger, to fan the embers of conflict until they burned into submission. Yet beneath the Emperor's velvet words, the Force shimmered with possibility, the fragile hope that the darkness might finally be challenged. 94. The duel between Luke and Vader. In the dim, echoing chambers of the second Death Star, father and son faced one another in a duel heavy with destiny. Their lightsabers ignited with soft, humming tones, one green, one crimson, casting shifting glows across polished floors and shadowed platforms. Each step Luke took was careful, calm, guided by compassion rather than fury. Vader, bound by conflict deeper than armor, pressed forward with steady determination. Their blades clashed like distant lightning, not with rage but with sorrow, a struggle woven from years of pain and hope. Luke sensed the shimmer of light still buried within his father and hesitated, refusing to fall to the Emperor's manipulations. And in that hesitation, the galaxy hung suspended, waiting, breathless, for the choice that would shift its fate. 95. Vader's redemption and final choice. As the Emperor unleashed torrents of dark energy upon Luke, the air trembled with crackling force. Luke cried out, not in anger, but in anguish, a plea that pierced the deepest corners of Vader's soul. For the first time in many years, the man beneath the mask truly saw his son, not as an enemy or a threat, but as a reflection of the compassion he had once known. A quiet battle unfolded within him, silent but seismic. Memories of a life lost, of laughter, of promises, of love, rose like fading stars. Then, with a surge of will stronger than the machinery sustaining him, Vader lifted the Emperor and cast him into the abyss. It was an act not of power, but of release. And in that final moment, Anakin Skywalker returned, bringing balance with a single, selfless choice. 96. The Fall of Palpatine. The Emperor's fall was not dramatic in sound, but in meaning. As he descended into the reactor shaft, arcs of crackling energy spiraled around him, illuminating the walls in blinding bursts. His scream faded into the endless depths of the station, swallowed by the hum of its colossal machinery. Across the galaxy, the force rippled. A tremor felt by beings who never knew his name, yet sensed that something dark and ancient had finally shattered. Star Destroyer officers paused mid-command, their hearts tightening with an inexplicable unease. Rebels on Endor felt the air lighten, as though an invisible weight had lifted. And in that quiet collapse of tyranny, the first true breath of freedom swept gently across the stars. 987. The Empire without its master. The moment Palpatine fell, the Empire lost more than a leader. It lost its center of gravity. Across star systems, officers hesitated, unsure of whose orders to follow. Fleets drifted without direction. Governors fell into arguments that once would have ended with a single imperial decree. For decades, every strand of control had been woven through Palpatine's will. When that will dissolved, the vast machinery of the Empire began to tremble. Some commanders clung to protocol, others fled, and a few sought to claim power for themselves. But beneath the confusion lay a deeper truth. The Empire had never been built to survive without its emperor. And in the quiet confusion that followed, the first cracks of collapse spread like hairline fractures across a once unbreakable facade. 98. The Endor celebration. Echoes across the stars. On the forest moon of Endor, the night erupted with soft drums, bright laughter, and warm lantern light weaving between the towering trees. Ewoks danced around fires, their songs rising into the canopy like joyous sparks. Rebel pilots embraced one another, tears of relief glistening in the gentle glow of burning embers. For the first time in a generation, the galaxy felt a shift, a lightening of the air, as though hope had gently unclenched its fists. Word of Palpatine's fall traveled swiftly, whispered in cantinas, shouted in marketplaces, etched into hurried transmissions. Though battles still burned elsewhere, this moment marked the beginning of something new, fragile, and bright. And under Endor's shimmering stars, freedom exhaled its first deep, peaceful breath. 99. The Empire begins to crumble. In the days that followed, the Empire fractured like a glacier thawing under morning light. Admirals turned on one another. Regional governors barricaded themselves behind loyal troops. Propaganda stations flickered, their once confident messages dissolving into static. Some worlds rose in celebration, removing imperial symbols and reclaiming their independence with trembling hands. Others fell into chaos, unsure how to rebuild after years of strict control. A few imperial remnants fought desperately to maintain order, unaware that their era had already slipped into history. The collapse was not a single event, but a slow fading, a long night gradually giving way to dawn. And through this unraveling, the galaxy took its first steps toward healing, guided by the quiet dream of balance restored. 100. The Empire fades into history. In the quiet years that followed the Battle of Endor, the once mighty Galactic Empire drifted into memory like stardust carried on a soft cosmic breeze. The roar of its march became a distant echo, fading across hyperspace lanes once patrolled by endless star destroyers. Worlds long held in fear began to breathe again, their skies warming with the gentle glow of new beginnings. Historians would someday write of the Empire's rise and fall, tracing each decision, each battle, each fragile turning point. But for most beings in the galaxy, the end of the Empire was not a moment. It was a feeling. A slow, dawning sense that the night was finally lifting. And as peace settled over distant horizons, the Force whispered a reminder carried through countless stars. Even the darkest era must eventually give way to light. And as our long journey across the stars comes gently to rest, may the Force bring balance to your mind and peace to your dreams. If these stories helped you drift into the galaxy tonight, feel free to like, subscribe, and share which Star Wars era you'd love to fall asleep to next. When you're ready for another night among the stars, tap the end screen to continue your sleepy voyage. And let yourself drift into another quiet chapter beneath the twin suns. Rest well, traveler. The Force will guide your dreams.